Hey everyone, I'm Rachel.
And I'm David.
And here's all you need to know about cruise excursions.
Let's go! Going to new places is always very, very exciting, but obviously you're going to want to do things when you go to those places. And so one of your best bets, and pretty much everybody does this, is they look at cruise excursions.
Yeah, so we're going to walk through the pros and cons of each of the different kinds of cruise ship excursions you can do, and then give you our overall recommendations, because we have spent a lot of time on cruise ship excursions. Like all of these different things we're about to present to you, we have done. So we want to share what we've learned and give you all of the information so that when you're looking at booking a cruise, you can make the best decision for you.
Yeah. All right, so the first option we're going to talk about is excursions you purchase through your cruise line.
So one of the main pros about booking through your cruise line is no matter what happens, you are always guaranteed return to your ship on time. They will wait for you.
Yes.
So even if there is a huge traffic accident and you're hours late past the all aboard time, they will wait for you. They have to. That is like the bare minimum they have agreed to do as part of selling you this excursion.
And we've seen that. We've waited several hours for people to get back from an excursion they booked through the cruise line and their bus broke down, and they gave us all an update, so we know that's actually what happened. But that's like one of the huge selling points, is that peace of mind, right?
Yes.
So I think it's actually really, really awesome.
Yeah, and one of the other pros is actually that, kind of in the same vein, that they will make things right if something bad happens on the excursions. Or even if you can't do the excursion because maybe they missed the port of call. If last minute you get canceled to a certain port of call for weather and you book something through the cruise line, you don't have to worry about it. They will automatically refund it to you. So that is a really big pro. Not only that, but if you're on the excursion and something goes wrong, so for instance, we didn't get served lunch when we were supposed to have lunch as part of our excursion, they automatically refunded us part of that excursion money without us having to do anything, because our tour guide operator talked to the cruise line and made them aware of what happened. So they just took care of us, because like when you book something through them, they want to take care of you because they know that they're going to be taking care of you on the ship for however many days to come, and they, want to make your experience a good one.
Yeah, and they want these experiences to be like really memorable and really work out for you, because they want you to keep purchasing them. They really try to get it all figured out for you. So one of the other perks is that the cruise lines really do vet these people, these companies. Cruise lines invest millions of dollars, investigating these companies and making sure they understand what's expected of them and what the level of information should be, what kind of hospitality the guests are going to be expecting. So I think they do an incredible job with that. And we've had amazing experiences over the years with some of these tour guides. They really, really do know their stuff. It feels like their quality, really some of the best in the business.
Well, and we know that this is the case too, because there have been multiple occasions where we've actually had a cruise ship personnel go on the excursion with us. And that's their way of ensuring that the quality of the experience stays up to what they're guaranteeing the guests. So yeah, that's happened multiple times on many different types of cruises, and that always kind of gives me peace of mind, because I know that like if something does go wrong, or if they see something that's not quite up to par, that they will report back through and get it fixed.
Yeah, they're always working on trying to make it a little bit better. And I think that is actually a really cool way to do it, because you have employees getting off the ship and also experiencing these beautiful places. And all they need to do is fill out a report, say, hey, everything was really, really smooth. This tour guide did this really great, maybe not so much this area. And then they can just keep improving upon it.
Yeah, and another perk is that at most of the big tourist sites, you will actually get either expedited entry or a reserved time slot. And if you book this by yourself or just have a driver and you get to this, certain spot by yourself, you may have to wait in a long line to buy a ticket, or even if you already have a ticket, you may have to wait just to get to a certain time slot. Whereas with these tours, they are very regimented. They know where they're going and at what time. And so we've never really had any issues getting into the site we're supposed to be going to, and it's just been very smooth.
Yeah, I would say there have been many times where I was so grateful that we were on a cruise excursion because we were skipping a big line.
Yes.
And I felt bad for the people that weren't in it. That's precious time, man. You're only in these places for so many hours, and to spend it in a line to try to get into a place that you are also going to be spending more time walking around in. Maybe you don't have all the information. This is a ridiculously valuable perk, in my opinion.
Yeah, and the last pro is just that they usually are very considerate and explicit about any mobility concerns that may arise on that given excursion. So on like the websites, it doesn't matter what cruise line it is, they will give you some sort of activity level whether it's low, moderate, strenuous, and then they will also list out if there's no wheelchair access or no ramps or if the ground is uneven. So they're very, very careful about letting you know what you're getting yourself into ahead of time, so that way people don't book something that they won't be able to enjoy.
Yeah, and if you're ever like questioning it, just go to the cruise excursion desk because they all know exactly what it's like. They know, hey, this might not be in your activity level range. Let's get you onto something else.
But as many pros as there are some cons to booking your excursion directly
Yes.
through the cruise line. So the biggest is that it is usually the most expensive excursion option. So a lot of these cruise lines upcharge anywhere from like 20 to 40% over booking the same thing on a third party. And part of that is the convenience. Like a lot of times when you book a cruise ship excursion, you are meeting on the ship and then they are guiding you off of the ship in a big group onto your bus. So you're not having to like look for somebody with your name on a sign or try to meet up with somebody in the city center where you don't know anybody. So it is very convenient, and your bus is like right outside your ship, and that's usually really great. But 20 to 40% is a lot, and so some people might be deterred by that.
Yeah, that's probably the main reason people don't book through cruise lines. And in my opinion, it is a little bit too much. I think it should be about that 10 to 20 range. I think that's a little bit more reasonable. We've been to some places where it's way too expensive to go through the cruise line, and we'll get over some of those other options for you here in a few, and that's how we've kind of explored other options. It's really, really hard. And again, it always comes down to your budget, what conveniences you're looking for, and where you find the value in what they're offering. So.
Yeah. And another con would be that there are typically larger groups than you would get on like booking a third party. So typically they're filling up one of those large passenger buses that you see, so maybe up to 50 guests on a given excursion. And there are options that are a small group, and they do say small group specifically on the website when you're booking. But if it doesn't say small group, odds are you are going to be in one of those larger groups.
Yes.
And so you're just going to have a larger group that you're going to have to deal with. And sometimes navigating in some of these smaller places, if the guide wants you to all stay together, can be a little bit difficult.
That can be insanely difficult. And I think that's probably my biggest pet peeve with booking through the cruise line. I usually feel like the dollar amount is usually worth it to me with some of the perks in there. But when you're with these big groups and you're going to like these really sensitive locations, like I can give a few examples where things were worse off because we were with a bigger group. Like we went to like the Nagasaki Museum and we were with a very large group, and I regret not doing a smaller group for something like that where it's very, very somber. So I don't know, that's the one I'm really conflicted with. I feel like it really can hurt your experience at some of these places.
Yeah, and the last con, it's kind of in that same vein, is they can have multiple buses doing the same tour.
Yeah.
So there was one day on this cruise where we were doing the Golden Circle in Iceland, and that's obviously something that a lot of people really want to do. They had 4 buses, so 4 buses of 50 people just from our cruise ship, and there was a different cruise ship in port. And so, unfortunately, because it's all the same excursion, they've promised us all the same thing, and so we're all kind of going to these sites at the same time. Usually there was like a 5 to 10 minute lag maybe between the buses, and so that allowed a little bit of separation, but that does mean that the sites can get a little bit more crowded when you're doing it that way. Now, that being said, that may not just be on your cruise excursion. Like, even if you book through a third party, you could end up at one of these locations at the same time as all 4 buses.
Yeah.
But if you're booking through the cruise line, if it's a high demand excursion, they're probably going to have multiple buses.
Unfortunately, I think that's a pretty big downfall. You go to some of these ruins and castles and places where one person can go in one direction up the stairs, but there's so many people there. Mm-hmm. It gets very, very awkward very, very quickly, and it does show. Like you will experience that at some point. I think if you do it more than a few times, I think you're going to notice this location probably has too many people at it.
Yeah. All right, so the next option that you have is to still book a group excursion, but to book it through a third party. So anybody other than your cruise ship. You could find these on Viator.com, GetYourGuide.com. I regularly use both of those. Or there's lots of other providers, but these are just not directly through your cruise line. So some pros here is this is usually your cheapest option. You're still going to be in a big group, but you're paying less because the cruise ship is not upcharging you, and so it's going to be a little bit cheaper.
So I really do actually enjoy this method. I think price-wise, it's actually a ridiculously good deal typically.
Yeah, and another pro would just be that depending on the tour you're doing, you could have a little bit of a smaller group than you would have coming from the cruise ship. Yep. And typically the sites will be a little less crowded because you're not in a group of 4 buses, like I talked about before, that are all going to the same sites. Yes, you may still have 4 buses that are also going to those same sites, but your time schedule might be a little bit different. Your tour operator's a little bit more agile maybe because they're not stuck to exactly what the cruise ship excursion card said.
Yeah.
So you may have a little bit more flexibility for it to be less crowded in certain places.
Yeah, and they're not really wrangling 50 people, really saves them a lot of time.
Yeah.
And these tour guides are going to be extremely knowledgeable about when spaces get very full. And so they can kind of like maneuver around that. Now, we've dodged huge groups. Like, we've pulled in as huge groups were leaving before because the tour guide knew this is roughly when they're going to be out of there. Let's get over there and knock it out now. And they can be a little more flexible than what the cruise line is doing. So I think it's actually a huge perk.
And the last pro would be that there's generally way more options. If you've looked at excursions on your cruise line's website, you know there's probably only 15 to 20 at the most, sometimes way less than that, excursions per port available. And that's just because obviously they have to go through the time to vet the operators and to negotiate deals and to make sure they are available that day. And that's a lot of work. And so they're not going to do that for types of tours that a lot of people aren't going to want to book or don't sell out consistently. So they may even get rid of some of the options they once had. But if you're booking through a third party, like, you can search tours in Belfast and there's hundreds of options that come up. And so you might be able to find something you would rather do because you're looking at third parties. Maybe the stuff that's on the cruise ship website just doesn't appeal to you.
Yeah, I think one of the important things before you even start this process is kind of understanding what you're looking for in the region that you're going to be in.
Yes.
If you're doing like British Isles and you think castles are awesome and you want to just see all the castles you can possibly see, cruise lines are typically not going super far inland, whereas some of these other smaller tour groups are going to be able to do that and take you to some of the bigger castles that aren't closer to the coast. But I think that that's like a really good way to see places, is to kind of understand what you want from a location, what exactly you really, really want to see, and see if the cruise line offers it. If it really doesn't, if you're really undecided, I think that could be a tiebreaker for you.
But there are some cons, even though it is less expensive and you may have a little bit more of a customized experience. One of the big cons is that these are not vetted by your cruise line. So a lot of these sites have reviews, but a lot of these tours don't have very many reviews, or they may honestly have some fake reviews. Because there are some sites that will let pretty much anybody review something. Now, there are certain sites that will only let you review something if you purchased it through them, like TripAdvisor. That's a great example. But like, if you're just checking like Google reviews, those can be fake. So just be really cautious. Look at the reviews, but look at pictures of people that have taken it as well, because you want to make sure that they're like actually posting pictures on that excursion and then it looks like what you want to do.
Exactly. I would say trust the images more than the typed out reviews. It is incredibly cheap to buy fake reviews. I don't know. I think that there's a couple extra steps, unfortunately, that I think are worth actually taking, because especially if you're going to these places, man, they're really hard to get to, and you don't want to waste your one shot at these locations. And you're obviously doing the research now because you're watching the video, but it's just unfortunately, it's one more step we kind of have to take when we're thinking about some of these tours. So.
Yeah, and another con, and this is one of the big ones, though you may be saving money up front, know your refund policy, because on a cruise, things happen. There could be weather, there could be medical emergencies, there can be all kinds of things that make it so you can't go to a certain port. And you may not know until the morning of that you can't go to that certain port. And so if you booked something that has a no refund policy and you paid $100, $200, $300 for that, then you're out of luck, because the cruise line doesn't have to compensate you for anything that you did not book through them.
Yeah, it's actually really, really unfortunate. We see it actually really fairly often. So some of these tours will only take a deposit to start with, and then if you can't make it, they understand you're part of the cruise ship. They're used to cruise ship customers, so they'll just keep the deposit and tell you have a nice day, see you next time. And that's actually pretty cool. I think that's actually really fair. They had everything planned out for you. They were ready that morning, and they got the surprise just like you did. So unfortunately, the deposit's probably going to go, but that's at least it's not the full fare. We typically look for those kind of tours where that's going to be the case, but there's a million different reasons you won't visit a port, and it's sad when it happens, and it's kind of the risk you take with cruising.
So the last big con of booking a group excursion through a third party is that you're not going with your cruise ship. So you're going to be mixed in with non-cruisers, which could be a good or a bad thing. And the most important part, though, is that they don't guarantee to return you to your ship. So if you're with a group, maybe it's a small group of 10 people or so, and you're going around and seeing a bunch of sites. If you're with people that are not on a cruise ship and your tour guide says, "Oh, is everybody okay if we get back an hour late?" and half of your group or more, maybe you're with 8 people out of 10 that are not on a cruise ship, and those 8 people don't want to return back before you're all aboard time, there is always a risk that you won't get back in time.
Yep.
and your cruise ship will not wait for you because they do not need to.
It's not their problem. Yep. So I in those situations, I do recommend when you get to ports, looking up like taxi numbers, make sure you have that kind of information, understanding where you're going to be at. Hopefully you get some kind of timeline. Now it might be flexible, but at least you know kind of the locations where you'll be. Try to keep an eye on it throughout the day. I know you don't really want to be doing your homework while you're experiencing these cool places, but it is super valuable. Now, if everyone on your tour is part of a cruise and they all understand, oh yeah, we got to be back at this time, that's always awesome because then everyone's on the same page. Everybody kind of understands what's going on, but always kind of keep an idea, understand where you're at, just in general in the country that you're not familiar with, and then have that taxi number in your phone, have a picture of it saved because you might not have good internet coverage, and you can always go to a visitor center at some of these locations, these cool stops you're at, and they'll be able to help you out, call you a taxi, get you back to the port. All right, and now your next option is actually private excursions through a third party. Now this has a lot of pros. Now the first one for me is it's actually completely customizable. You can really kind of talk to your tour guide, explain to them the things that really do interest you, maybe make a list and then have that available to you and kind of present it to the tour guide, and they will help figure it out and kind of point you in the right direction, and then they'll figure out the best route to take you to those places. And I think that's incredibly valuable for an amazing trip.
Yeah, and when we say private, we mean it's just you and your party. So you can talk to your tour guide and tell them exactly what you want. So that's really the best option if you know exactly what you want to see in the area, but maybe there's not an excursion you were able to find anywhere else that offers just those things. Or if you have some sort of like mobility concern and you know that you want to go to a certain place, but you're worried about being able to navigate it, they will give you more time. They'll just make you feel very comfortable.
Yeah, or they'll know that that's not really a reasonable location for you and then present other options. And that's actually the next pro, is that having a local really show you around and really understand and really love the places that they live is so different from having like a regimented tour company really kind of like, I don't know, it feels very commercial.
Sometimes when you're with a group, your tour guide, sometimes they are local, but sometimes that company has like imported people from other places as seasonal workers to run those tours. If it's really important to you to get to know like the local culture, private is probably your best bet.
But now those people aren't bad, don't get me wrong, like they can be awesome, but if you really want to like kind of get a vibe for what it's like living in these places, this is probably your best bet because they're going to know they've been living there for 20, 35, 40 years or whatever. So those have always been like the most fun tour guides. I feel like the ones that actively live there, and it feels like you're really in this person's hometown, and it's just a really cool vibe.
Yeah, and then the next pro is actually that it's usually a very comfortable riding experience. It's usually a pretty nice car or just like a smaller passenger van, and they usually have nicer leather seats. They usually give you water. You can tell them what the climate control you want is like, so you're not too hot or too cold. So it's just overall, it's a luxurious, comfortable experience.
Yeah, and they're always looking out to make sure that you're comfortable. It's actually usually a really, really cool thing that they do.
And one other pro is that they can go to anywhere. Basically, they can go to like super off the beaten path places because they don't have a giant van that they have to navigate on these tiny roads, or some big sites are protected and they can only accommodate cars of a certain size or groups of a certain size. And so you really do have way more ability to go to some of these off the grid type places. So if that's something that's really important to you, a private tour may be the best bet.
Yeah, honestly, we've been to a lot of places that just straight up didn't even have bus parking. There was no universe where these buses from the bigger cruise lines were going to make it into these locations. It's just physically impossible. You're going to get the places that are just impossible otherwise.
And the last pro is just that it's easier to talk to your tour guide. So obviously on a group tour, you can still talk to your tour guide, especially if you're sitting up close to the front, but their main objective is to give as much information to the group as they can. So if you have a private tour guide, they may have certain things they still want to tell you and make sure that they point out on the drive or whatever, but they are making it much more customizable to you. So you can ask them any question you might have. So if it's a place that you're really, really interested in just like learning things about, that's really the best way to do it.
Yeah, I agree. And this is one of the biggest perks, honestly, because they always have really good answers and really understand the place that you're going to. And it's so much fun to actually like converse with them about maybe not even the locations you're going to, just like general pop culture about the places they live. Like, it's really, really cool. And you can ask them like, what's your favorite restaurant? Why do you like it? And it brings it back down to a human level for me. It's just a great way to see a country. Is it worth some of the cons we're about to go through is the real question.
Yeah, and the biggest one for me is the cost.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're booking a private tour for just your group versus a large group tour, it's going to be more expensive. And it is going to always be more expensive than the group tour with the cruise ship. Even though they do upcharge from like another group tour, it's still going to be way more expensive. It could be anywhere from $100 to $300 to $400 more per person than your cruise ship excursion. So obviously that's a big con. That's why when we were talking about the pros, we said know exactly what you want to see, because if this is the only way to see the thing you want to see, then that might be worth the cost to you. Yeah. But if you know the places you want to see and you can get there using one of the other cheaper options, maybe that's it for you.
Yeah, I really think, again, it's going to come down to personal preference. Now, we have been to some places where it's like, yeah, the cost is so bad, but the tour companies aren't really doing what we want to do, and the cruise line is not really doing what we want to do. Is it worth cutting an excursion at this other stop and then buying a private excursion here? Sometimes I really do think that's worth it.
And another con is if you're an introvert, it can be a little bit awkward.
It is.
I know we talk to you guys a lot, but otherwise we're both pretty introverted, and I don't particularly enjoy talking to new people all the time. And so it can be really awkward when you spend like 8 hours with somebody and you know you're never going to see him again.
Yeah.
And you're just trying to come up with random questions to ask this person. So you feel the silence. Ultimately, they probably don't care and they're used to it. So.
Yeah, it's like we're so excited to be in a place you see literally every day, and you're probably bored of talking about. But I'm actually pretty good about filling in the gaps and not having awkward silence and stuff, because I do legitimately find these people very, very interesting. Now, I do think a lot of these tour guides make it easy. They're very, very fun and personable. And so it might be awkward to start, and then maybe it gets more loose and you start laughing and you start having fun. But that might not be for everybody. If you're super shy or you have social anxiety or something along those lines, I don't think I would ever recommend doing something like this, because you are in a car with just a stranger essentially. Unfortunately, there's some ice you have to break. It is very, very difficult for some people out there. This is honestly, it might be a deal breaker for a lot of people out there. Now, if you're extroverts, this is like a gold mine for you, because you're going to be able to talk about literally anything you want at any point you want, and you're going to have an amazing time. So really, really difficult for us to pick a side for you. That's going to be something you figure out on your own.
But another con, and it goes kind of along with the cost, but it's the same as if you book through a third-party group excursion. If something happens and your ship does not make the dock, or there's weather, or whatever the case may be, you may be out money. So know your refund policies, especially with this. Private tours are much more expensive. Sometimes they only require a deposit up front and then you can pay cash when you visit. Sometimes they require you to pay the whole thing a week or 2 weeks in advance. And if that's the case, they may not refund you anything if it gets canceled last minute. So just be really, really careful about what you're booking. This is kind of a con and maybe not. It just depends on your personality. But a lot of tours that are advertised as tours are actually just a driver. Mm-hmm. So it's like a taxi driver taking you around various locations. And yes, they're still going to be flexible. They're going to take you anywhere you want to be taken. But they're not necessarily going to be telling you facts about the area or pointing scenic things out. I mean, some of them will do a little bit of that because they drive the routes every day. But they're not actually a licensed tour guide or just a tour guide at all. And so they won't be giving you as much information as if you did take a guided tour.
Yeah, and I'm kind of conflicted on that. That's actually kind of cool too, in a way. Yeah. Now, granted, you're paying a lot of money for a private driver, essentially. But if you like just pulling stuff up on your phone and reading about it, some places have like audio guides you can pull up on your phone and just kind of do that for the hour that you're at a location. I think that's actually a pretty cool way to see a place, especially for introverts. I think that's actually not too bad of an option for people. It's worth mentioning, at least. I think
it just depends on what you want out of your tour. If you want a lot of information about the places you're going and you want to be pointed out scenic things along the way, then just be careful about what you're booking, because the listing should say explicitly if it's just a driver or if it's a guide.
Yep.
And the last con kind of goes along with that, is that these private tours don't usually include any entrance fees to any attractions.
Oh, right.
So not only are you paying more for the private tour guide or driver, you're also going to be paying at the site for any entrance fees. So any like castles that have entrance fees, like Mont Saint Michel we're going to on a private tour, and they have an entrance fee. So all of those things are in addition to that cost. And because you're not paying for it until you get there, there's always a chance there's a line and that you're waiting. So just kind of keep in mind that when you book a group tour, pretty much everything's included all the time. But with these private tours, you will probably have to pay additional costs as well. And your last real option, if you're wanting to get off your cruise ship at a port, is just to not book anything and to wing it, which is not my specialty. If you know anything about us, that's really not how I vibe on my vacations. They're more like, they're not vacations, they're adventures. So, yeah, this is not really for me, but it is very much David's vibe. So I'm going to let him talk about some of the pros here.
Yeah, I think not being tethered to like a certain schedule is actually really, really fun way to see a place. I think that you're in these places with like really good historical values and really interesting things happening. If you just want to get off and walk around and read about certain buildings or see really cool things within that city, I think that's a really, really fun way to see a place. All these places have really interesting things that have happened at some point in time. Trying to find out a little bit more about that, I think, is an awesome way to see a city.
Yeah, and I guess another kind of pro for this is if you are really into shopping or you're really into food at local destinations, you really want to try the local specialties. This is a good option for you because generally around ports or, you know, within walking distance, hopefully, they will have some shops and they will have some restaurants and they generally have decent reviews. And the only con, I guess, to that is just they might get a little crowded. But walking around and just kind of playing it by ear, you'll be able to try more things and maybe get the souvenirs that you wanted.
Yeah, I do think it's important getting away a little bit from the main drag and kind of exploring those places because those are like where the locals are kind of going.
Yeah.
You're at least experiencing some of the culture, some of the food. Maybe you get to talk to some locals that way too. The shop owners are almost usually always locals. It's a totally different way to absorb the information. Especially, I feel like this is a really good way to do it if you're just not at a port that long.
Yeah.
Some ports you're barely there, and it's kind of like, oh, do I really want to book a 4-hour excursion when we're in port for 4 hours? Not really going to see that much. Maybe the itinerary is kind of whatever. You couldn't find a private tour that did anything for you. Maybe this is just a really cool way. At least I'm seeing something. Let's go out and kind of explore, get a bite to eat. I have like a lot of appreciation for people that kind of take in the culture that way. I think that's really fun.
Yeah, and this is not to say, like, if you don't book anything ahead of time, that doesn't mean you can't take some sort of excursion or tour. There are lots of times at ports where right off the cruise ship, there are tour providers out there waiting to sell you a tour. So you could do that, and you could get it for cheaper than booking it online, even through a third party. But again, you're running into that risk of maybe not being vetted, not knowing anything about them, not checking their reviews.
Yeah.
So while it is a pro that you can go and book something last minute, just kind of keep that in mind. Now on to the cons though. And this is where I come in. So one of the main cons is that everything could be sold out. And yeah, I'm talking about tours. Like if you get off the ship, maybe there's not a tour in town you could take that day. But also just landmarks. If you get off the ship and you really wanted to go to a certain castle, let's just say, in this town that you're in, it's possible that all the time slots for that day are sold out already because the cruise ship had all of their excursions going, the third parties had all their excursions going there. So there are times where everything that you're curious about doing in town could already be sold out.
That's a legitimate problem. If you really don't know what you're going to do and you're just walking around town and you see a really cool monument that needs an admission fee or something like that, hopefully it's available, but temper expectations really might not be.
Yeah. And a lot of ports are not really walkable, or some of them are not even that picturesque.
Yes.
So just keep that in mind. A lot of these ports, though, they do offer free shuttles or maybe even some paid shuttles to like a downtown area. So you could still do that, but walking around is not always an option, and sometimes it's not even allowed. Some ports actually physically don't let you walk around, and you have to have something booked in order to get off the ship. Yeah,
or at least take the shuttle in. But it's an issue because these cities all converted their ports that were used for commercial purposes into cruise ship terminals. And so it's very, very industrial. You'll see cranes and cargo containers and stuff. Taking the shuttle into town, hopefully that's an option. Usually it is. Usually there's something like that. You can get to an amazing country and look at the cruise terminal and be like, oh, this is not very exciting. But
well, and that kind of leads into like the last con is like this really opens you up to not maximizing your time in these places that you're paying for this cruise to go see. So if you're on a cruise just to cruise and have that experience, then this may not be a bad option for you, because if you don't really care what you see or what you do, then you're just kind of there for the experience. Great. But if you're going to places that you've dreamt of going and you don't book anything ahead of time, it could seem underwhelming and you could not get to experience the truth of the city or the place that you're visiting just because you didn't think ahead.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing point, actually. I'm in a lot of online forums. I'm on Facebook groups and stuff and Reddit. And when I see people say this location wasn't good at all. Here's why I hated it. And when I read those posts, it's usually people that like didn't do anything at all. It's like, yeah, I went to the main town and the food I had was bad and it was like some tourist shop or whatever. So finding out those little tips and tricks, it's going to amplify your vacation tenfold. And you just plan. Just do your planning. I think it's worth the effort. All right, now we gave you our pros and cons for pretty much the major options out there. Now we're going to give you guys the tips and tricks for the things that we do, and maybe this will kind of help you or put you on the right track to success here.
Yeah, so the first thing is there are 3 situations where we would highly suggest doing a cruise ship excursion. We know we said they're more expensive, but ultimately in these 3 scenarios, I think it's definitely worth it. So the first one is if you're a first-time cruiser.
Yeah.
If you've never cruised before or even traveled internationally or maybe just very limited travel internationally, this is going to be your safest, easiest bet to make sure that you're not having to be stressed out about if you're going to make it back to the boat on time. They introduce you to everything. They give you all of the rules and all the regulations ahead of time. So you won't have to have any stress about what's actually going to happen on the day.
Yeah, I would almost exclusively suggest if you've never done it before, just do the cruise ones. I understand it's more expensive, but when you have a little more travel experience on cruises, traveling cruises is a lot different than traveling on land. I think then you can kind of branch out. You get a little more confident in what you're doing, what you're seeing, where you're going. Then you can kind of branch out.
And the second situation is that if it's your first time visiting a bucket list place for you.
Yes.
Could probably be debated because of some of what we said about like the private excursions. But for me, like when I'm visiting a place I'm really excited about, booking a cruise ship excursion means I'm never going to have an awful experience. And then if something does go wrong, there's going to be like a recourse for me to fix that bad experience. And it's also going to mean I know exactly what I'm getting myself into. I know exactly which stops we're making. I know exactly what we're going to be seeing. And so when I'm on a bucket list place, like those are the most important things to me.
Yeah, I think that's really smart too, because you're almost guaranteed to see these places, barring something catastrophically going wrong. And that's pretty much invaluable when you're talking about a bucket list place. You got to do everything you can, especially if you don't feel like you're going to ever have another opportunity. So don't risk it. Absorb, enjoy your vacation, enjoy your once-in-a-lifetime location. And the cruise line helps alleviate just a little bit of some of those worries. So I think that's a really good use of it.
And the last one where I would highly recommend doing a cruise ship excursion is if there's some sort of language barrier that you're concerned about.
Yeah.
Now, granted, a lot of these places, especially if you book like a third party, they are going to list what language that tour is going to be in. But in my experience, anytime you book through your cruise line, they are going to give you the best English speaking or whatever language you do speak tour guide. So they also do offer tours in other languages sometimes. For me, like if I'm worried about a language barrier, it's much easier to book through the cruise line because I know for 100% if this tour is in English, there's going to be an English speaker.
Yeah, understanding that your tour is going to be in your native language is incredibly helpful, especially when you're going to places like Iceland where the language is incredibly difficult to understand. I couldn't even read the traffic signs. We got lost on a hiking trail because it had a similar name to something else. It could be incredibly overwhelming as a whole, being in places where the language is so different from what you're used to. So I don't think it's worth risking it. I think that's a really good option. And so our next tip is I would never book a third-party tour that ends within an hour of your all-aboard time. I don't think an hour is nearly long enough. You're not really sure where you're going to get dropped off. Now you might have those kind of things figured out, but maybe your driver's taking you back and the road's closed or they don't let him pass because he's not an official cruise person or anything like that.
There's just traffic.
Or there's just traffic.
You just don't know.
Yeah, you're cutting it way too close at that point. I think it's worth ending early just to have that peace of mind that you're going to get back okay. Now, it does suck going to these exotic locations and cutting hours off of your time just because you're worried about not getting back on the ship. But you really don't know what could go wrong. An hour is way too close.
Now, your cruise ship excursion can end right at all aboard time. Yeah. And typically they do. But yeah, anything through a third party, you need to give yourself some cushion.
A big cushion.
Now, our next tip would be about water shuttle or tender ports. So for most ports, your ship can pull right up to the dock and you can just walk right off. But there are some ports where your ship will actually anchor off of the coast and then use their smaller lifeboats to shuttle all the passengers to the coastline. This typically happens in the more exotic places or just smaller bays where maybe the water's not as deep. And it's a really great, I love a lot of the water shuttle or tender ports we've been to. but it is a lot more precarious. There's a lot of times where maybe the swell is too high. We actually missed a port this cruise because the weather looked fine, but the waves were too high, and so the water shuttles were too rocky, and they did not want to risk taking people ashore. So our really big recommendation for any water shuttle port is to either book through your cruise line or to not book anything until you get to the port. Doing it through the cruise line, they're guaranteed to give you your money back, and not booking something until you get there, you can usually just get on the water shuttle, get off downtown somewhere, and go and find a tour. But I would not book anything ahead of time unless you're going to book through your cruise line.
Yeah, and every cruise line does tenders a little bit differently in terms of the way they get you on them and take you in. Sometimes you go and get a ticket and you don't know where your spot in line is going to be for that ticket. Sometimes they're just, here's the line, follow it, and you're going to get on your tender eventually and get aboard. So really, you can't really give your guide an
That's
accurate
true.
timing. You just don't know when you're going to be on shore. So I just can't recommend it unless your driver is very, very flexible or you have a private driver who's waiting for you or something like that. So I think that's a really, really good opportunity to just do the cruise line one. They'll send you guys out on a different tender.
If they have everything accounted for
Yeah.
ahead of time, they know exactly how many people they need to get off at a certain time, and they have your bus waiting for you. So it's just a lot less of a stressful experience on those water shuttle days. And we already talked a lot about reading reviews, so I don't want to harp on that piece of this very much. But it's really, really important to read everything when you're booking a third-party tour. So reviews are very important, but also just reading the itinerary and the description and like any special notes, because there are a lot of tours that I have seen on Viator and Get Your Guide that say they are not suitable for cruise ship passengers.
Yeah, and that's pretty brutal too, right? Because you're going to find excursions out there that are incredible. Cover like everything you could possibly want to see, but it doesn't end at the cruise terminal. And then it's up to you to get from where they do drop you off downtown to the cruise terminal. And again, it's really, really difficult. And it's hard for us to tell you not to do these things because we want you to go and have an incredible time. And it really is one of the reasons people don't like cruising, is because they want to go and do everything they possibly can in a country, and then they're there for 2 weeks to do it. And that's a completely valid, reasonable way to see a country. Honestly, it's probably one of the best ways to see a country. But we're focused on the cruise portion right now. Cruising's incredible for its own reasons. We're doing an okay job of relaying that to you. You're gonna have an incredible time. Really, really absorb and appreciate where you're going.
I'm always early for everything anyway, but always arrive early for your tours, no matter what you booked. If you booked it through the cruise line, if you book it through a third party, try to be a little bit early. Now, don't be an hour early because that would be a little bit obnoxious, but try to be like 15, 20 minutes early to whatever time they tell you to meet. On a cruise ship, especially if you're meeting in like a lounge or somewhere on the ship and then all being walked off together, they usually do first in, first out.
Yep.
So you'll usually get a better bus seat, or at least more choice of which seat on the bus that you want at that point. And if you show up a little bit early for your tour off of the ship, you may get to start your tour off the ship a little bit early, or you may get a little bit of an introduction to your tour guide before everybody else meets up with you there. And so it's just like a more pleasant way to start your day, and you're not going to be stressed out wondering where you go to meet these people.
Yeah, on your excursion ticket, it'll say your meetup time at a certain time. Literally no one on cruise ships has ever followed that for some reason. So we always show up about 20 minutes early, 15 minutes early. And like Rachel mentioned, you get the better bus spot. But another perk to add on to that is when everybody's there, your bus is going to leave. So if you start beating people to these locations, these landmarks, get a little bit of time to yourself.
Well, we've actually had it where our bus was there early. We left about 10 minutes early, and our bus driver actually stopped at an additional location, viewpoint, for 10 minutes. Just in Iceland this trip.
Yep.
So that way we got to have a stop that we weren't scheduled to have. So it's always just better to be just a little early.
Yeah.
And another tip is that there are sites like cruisemapper.com that actually will show you how many ships are going to be in a given port on the same day as you. If you're the only ship in port and you're seeing lots of options available, odds are you can not book anything ahead of time. You can just get to that port and there's going to be plenty of people around like, hey, do you want to take a tour? And that'll be cheaper. But if you see there's going to be 3 other ships in the same port on the same day, or even 1 other ship if it's a large mega ship, then you kind of know, things are going to be sold out. Maybe there aren't going to be a lot of third-party tours available, and so maybe booking through the cruise line is my best option.
And on the other end of that, if you see the massive mega ships in port and 3 other ships are in port, maybe you just don't want to go to the landmarks. Maybe it's going to ruin the experience for you. Maybe you plan on coming back already. You're going to do this cruise again at some point in time. Maybe just forget about it this time.
Another tip is that they will always give you the port authority information inside your cabin, whether it be on your TV in your stateroom or on a piece of paper or whatever. always take a picture of
Yes.
that. It'll tell you like your all aboard time. It'll tell you the phone number in case something happens, especially if you're going off on your own. Having that information could really save you if something
It's a
does
big
go
deal.
wrong.
It's ridiculously important. It sounds small, but I'm telling you, if you ever get stuck, you're going to wish you had that, and it's critical.
And my last tip, and maybe my favorite, is that you should always take a snack.
I didn't know you were going to say this one.
So I'm a pickier eater. If you've watched us a while, you know this. But even outside of that, we've had cruise ship excursions where we had a wonderful lunch that I thoroughly enjoyed. But sometimes it's not on your timing. Like, especially if you're in a group tour,
True.
they're going to have lunch timed when they have lunch timed. And maybe you took off at 8 a.m. and it's 2 p.m. and that's when lunch is. And I'm like, I can't not eat for 6 hours when you're hiking and, walking around a ton. So take a snack with you. They also, sometimes are not that great of lunches, or they aren't good for picky eaters or vegetarians or whatever the case may be. I always bring a little bag, like pastries, granola bar, chips, things like that.
Yeah.
Just pack something light with you so that you don't get hangry.
Yeah, well, and don't feel bad about it either. Other people are doing it too, us included. And I do think it's also important to at least try the local stuff. If it sounds like something you've never had before, you're never going to have it again, please try it. I have found some things over the years that were pretty interesting. It's at least a different way of living or trying or experiencing a culture. I think that's all really.
So usually it's very fresh, and they're doing their best to supply a lot of people with food at the same time as well. But yeah, just still take a snack, especially if you're a pickier eater, but also just if you need to eat more consistently than 5 to 6 hours apart.
Just don't get hangry like Rachel mentioned. Just bring snacks so you can avoid that tension. All right, so overall, I think my preferred method, if money was no object at all, it would be probably the private tours, just the two of us with a driver or a tour guide that's willing to drive us around and give us cool facts. Even though we're kind of introverted, I still think that's like a really, really cool way to see a place. Maybe it's location based. But...
Yeah, I think for me, it just really depends on the place we're going. If somewhere very remote, I honestly prefer doing a cruise ship excursion because then I have peace of mind because I have anxiety. He does not. So he's not ever really worried about if we're going to make it back on time or not, but I am. And so if it's somewhere very remote, I think having the cruise ship excursion and being fully taken care of that way is my preferred method. But if it's somewhere that we've maybe been a few times, or like Belfast, where there's lots of different things to see outside of the city, but they're not that far and roads are good, I think private excursions are a really great way to go. I think it's a really good thing to balance out your trip. Like with this trip we're currently on, we're doing all of these things. We are doing, a hop on, hop off bus that we're not going to book until the day we get to Oslo. We're doing private excursions with a guide with just our group. We're doing lots of cruise ship excursions. We're doing third-party excursions. So when you're doing your budget for your trip, budgeting these things into it, and then maybe saying, well, this is a stop that I can really splurge on because I'm going to skimp a little bit on this other stop that is not as important to me. That's where you should really go. I think most people are not going to book one kind of excursion for their entire trip. And so just be prepared to kind of know the trade-offs. And that's why we wanted to make this video for you guys.
Yeah, I think understanding your personal strengths and weaknesses of your party really, really helps, and understanding what you want to see and where you're willing to sacrifice. And give and take that's the fine line you're trying to walk when you're making these decisions. And I think that's really going to impact your trip as a whole. I don't want you to go on the first couple of days and then your excursion kind of sucks and you feel like that's going to ruin the rest of your trip. I think there's just so much more to it, and trying to rolling with the punches a little bit is going to just overall make your whole trip and your morale a little bit better. Not every excursion we've ever done has been perfect.
No.
Obviously we've run into issues with all of these kinds of things. We understand again where the pros and cons are, but just don't let any of these things, don't let one little thing ruin your whole trip. You're in these places most people on earth will never get an opportunity to see, and that alone in its essence is so incredible. And
yeah, so do you have any other questions about cruise excursions that we may not have answered?
Yeah, I'm sure we missed something out there, so please let us know. We're always watching the comments. We're always willing to help you guys out. So if you have very specific questions, please let us know.
Yeah, and if you want to know specifically which excursions we've done in certain ports we mentioned, let us know that too. I can definitely get you that information and give you more detail about all of these places that we visited. And if you enjoyed this video and want to see more content from us, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. But for now, I'm Rachel.
And I'm David.
And we hope this video helps you find the right direction for your next adventure.
Bye.